But why Russell is here today,
Well,
and why?
you'll remember that last month when I was on the show, we did a show on what we called foolish atheists.
Yes.
And I was intending to explore that topic a lot, but half an hour was filled up by some guy on the phone.
Straw man.
Who really exemplified the concept. It was a very popular episode based on the email feedback we got, but I was a little disappointed that I didn't get to some of my other groups who were foolish atheists, and the three that I mentioned during the show were communists, Raelians, and objectivists. Surprisingly, we didn't get a lot of people who were clamoring to defend communism or Raelianism. But we did get quite a bit of email saying, some of it saying, how dare you mess with objectivism? And I thought, as I mentioned on the blog today, what's the point of having an atheist show if you can't step on a few toes? So thanks all of you for encouraging me to do a whole show today about the things I think about objectivism.
The question is, since there's a, do we want to go ahead and take this one here before we actually get started on the topic?
I don't know. I don't really want to start the topic with a
That's
call
what I,
about
that's what I
the
was.
topic.
Oh, well, does it qualify?
I don't know.
You pick.
What? I'll tell you what. Phil,
Yeah.
How you doing?
do you have something to say about objectivism?
Actually, go ahead, and I can wait on the line
Okay.
when you're, into the show.
All right, thanks.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
We'll get back to you. Yeah, quick call cue there. Anyway, let's see. Before I actually read some of the email we got about this, which is actually a pretty good intro to why the topic is interesting, I'd like to first comment on the musical selection today. It was 2112 by Rush. Excellent album musically. And I found out that it was actually, it's a concept album. It tells a story in about 20 minutes, and the story is actually ripped off from Ayn Rand's book, Anthem. And to give a short, I don't want to say ripped off, it's homage to Anthem. Because, as I said, Neil Peart is a brilliant lyricist who happened to be very inspired by Ayn Rand, who is the founder of Objectivism. The book Anthem is about, basically to give a very short summary, there's a future Earth in the book where these evil overlords rule the world, put strict limits on how often people can invent things, and they also have outlawed the use of words such as I and ego. And they force everybody to refer to themselves as we. And the main character goes out and somehow rediscovers the secret of Thomas Edison's light bulb. And so he tries to bring this great discovery to the World Council of Scholars, and then he gets shot down and imprisoned and tortured. In the album 2112, the light bulb is replaced by a guitar, which is then, we're treated to a sequence where Alex Lifeson, the guitarist, goes through this fake sequence where he pretends to be learning on his own to play the guitar for the first time, and goes in 10 minutes from plunking out some clumsy notes to playing an awesome solo that's worthy of, Alex Lifeson. So anyway, cool album. And an illustration of a lot of the philosophy of Ayn Rand, which she expressed a lot through her fiction. Ayn Rand was, let me just cheat and pull up the Wikipedia article on her. It says that she was born Alisa Zinovievna Rosenbaum. She was a Russian-born American novelist, philosopher, playwright, and screenwriter, and she is widely known for her best-selling novels, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, both of which I'm going to talk a little bit about today, and for developing a philosophical system called Objectivism. So, unless you have something you'd like to interrupt with, Matt,
Nope.
Let me get back to let me get to some of the email we got last week, some of which was a reaction to hearing that we might talk about objectivism. Garner writes, I stumbled across your podcast on iTunes. It's a good show. I listened to the podcast concerning atheists that do more harm than good for the cause. First off, I want to commend you for tackling the topic. No one likes seeing the Bible thumper and the Dawkins student in a yelling match in the cafeteria. However, I did have some questions. You said that you would not associate with objectivists. I tried to think of why you draw the line there. I figured it was because the political views that are closely attacked. Libertarians are hard to reconcile with secular humanism. However, you went on to mention that you dislike the authoritarian tone that most objectivists took. While this has not been my experience, maybe yours have been different. If you have the time, I would appreciate a quick explanation as to why you would not associate with the group. I don't think I said I wouldn't associate with them anyway. I just said I don't think that they make atheists look good.
Yeah, and I don't remember how it was phrased, and I'm not going to go back and watch it, but I could possibly see saying something like, I don't associate myself with objectivism as a philosophy. My experience with objectivists has been kind of hit or miss.
Right.
And my views of objectivism itself, which we'll get to later on, don't in any way preclude associating with them. And in fact, I agree with a great deal of it on some level, not necessarily at the core.
I will mention that I've read both Atlas Shrugged, this book here, and The Fountainhead.
I'm sorry.
No, everybody says that. I kind of liked Atlas Shrugged the first time I read it. Then a friend of mine explained to me what was so awful about it, and now I understand why you say I'm sorry. But let's see. Okay, next email. Tony says, I did get a chance briefly to listen to the Foolish Atheist show, and I was bummed that objectivism wasn't covered. I'll explain. I used to attend the Mid-Michigan Atheist and Humanist meetings, but stopped for reasons of time, but also was just not interested because it's an older group and they get news quite late, sometimes 6 months or a year late. They also discuss politics too often. Not that I don't care, but that should be a separate group and not dedicate 3 months in a row to it. Okay, to the point. Quite a few people in the group really liked Ayn Rand and talked about objectivism. I really didn't fully understand except for the idea that objectivists were all about logic and reason and were atheists. When I heard just a brief mention that objectivists were more cult-like and were in the same group as Raelians, it piqued my interest. I wouldn't say they're quite in the same group.
Part of the problem is that when we talked about this last time you were on, is that we hit this really briefly and we got so sidetracked. So today is a way of kind of correcting that and talking about it in more detail.
I'd really love to hear a show on objectivists if it can fill the slot. If I ever do return to the local group here, I'd love to be able to bring a different, conflicting point of view to the discussions. So, Tony, my gift to you today. Meanwhile, we got a couple of emails about objectivism, which seemed like a strange coincidence because I don't think they were actually asked after hearing this show. Kelly asked, does Martin or anyone else with your crew, so she's asking about the blog, have you written anything about objectivism as a religion? And I said, as a matter of fact, I'm thinking about doing a show next month on objectivism. And she said, I hope you do your show talk about objectivism. Those folks are annoying. And then on the flip side, this is the last email, Brad wrote, being the scholars that you are, I would imagine that you would be interested in whatever information you can find to assist your cause. Though this book asserts many of the ideas you already champion, I feel that it still retains some useful bits. The book is Objectivism, The Philosophy of Ayn Rand by Leonard Peikoff. I think you will be particularly interested in the law explaining the law of causality. The chapter explaining the law of causality. And another chapter that might pique your interest is the discussion of human knowledge. It is clear that you have an exceptional understanding of human knowledge. Thank you very much. However, I feel this book offers a different perspective which may be more easily understood by the callers. And let's be honest, the simpler you can make it, the better.
He just called all of you stupid. We'll give you his email address later.
Yeah, sure.
No, we won't.
I'm not so sure that the simpler you can make a concept, the better. I forget who said you should make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler. The point being that some things really can be oversimplified, and they can end up sounding better that way. while in fact losing the benefit of being accurate. All right, so let's get to objectivism. You can follow me if you want, as usual, in the Atheist Experience blog, atheistexperience.blogspot.com, where I've posted a bunch of links for your enjoyment. And the first one was a link to the article on objectivism. So I'll give the really simple explanation of what objectivism is. From the Wikipedia article, Ayn Rand's philosophy is based on 3 axioms: the axiom of existence, the law of identity, and the axiom of consciousness. The axiom of existence is, existence exists. The law of identity is A. That is, objects are always equal to themselves. And the axiom of consciousness is, consciousness exists. These are all things, I mean, they're axioms, okay? I would consider them pretty much no-duh assertions. I mean, I wouldn't yet consider them the foundation of some very insightful philosophy. I think you could make a case, and Ayn Rand was an atheist, and I think you could make a case that some of where she's going with this is to sort of separate her views about objectivity and the real physical world from supernaturalism. And I think this is the part where you and I would heartily agree with anything that Ayn Rand might have to say. But from there, she's going to take it on to a bunch more assertions, which I'm going to get to. This is from the Objectivist newsletter in 1962. They're sort of the basic principles of objectivism. Number 1, reality exists as an objective absolute. Facts are facts, independent of man's feelings, wishes, hopes, or fears. I'm pretty
Yeah,
fine
I
with
think for the
that.
most part, I'm on par. I'm on board with
Okay.
that one.
Number 2, reason, the faculty which identifies and integrates the material provided by man's senses, is man's only means of perceiving reality, his only source of knowledge, his only guide to action, and his basic means of survival. Again, I can't really complain yet. Okay, number 3. Man, every man is an end in himself, not the means to the ends of others. He must exist for his own sake, neither sacrificing himself to others, nor sacrificing others to himself. The pursuit of his own rational self-interest and of his own happiness is the highest moral purpose of his life. Okay, here's where I start to get shaky.
Yeah.
And it's not so much that I'm necessarily complaining about what she's chosen as her values. I mean, I do have some misgivings about it, but it's not so much that I have a problem with in number 3. It's the way that she presents it as basically a basic, obvious fact, a truism. A couple of months ago, for the last couple of months, I've been having an exchange with Chuck Colson, you might know. If you check the blog under the Chuck Colson tag, you'll see that we're now up to 3 total posts that have been written by Chuck Colson in response to me. And I'm trying to come up with a comprehensive response to him. But one of the things that I hit him on in reviewing his recent book was that he seems to have, well, first of all, he, very much like Ayn Rand, talks a lot about objective reality. He thinks that the problem in the world is all these postmodernists who go and say there's no such thing as truth, everything is subjective, yada, yada, yada. And I mentioned in my response to him that this is a point where he and I really agree, up to a point. The problem is, he takes this statement that there is objective reality, and then he just runs wild with it by talking about the Bible and stuff, and talking about how obviously it's true that Christian values are the best values. That's not obvious at all, because while I think that there is objective reality in the world, there's also stuff that happens inside your head, and most of the things that you value are in there.
Not only is it not obviously true, or not only not obvious, I don't think it's true.
Well, yeah.
And I think that we could debate many of the fundamental moral and ethical tenets of Christianity, and have countless times on the show. To the kind of flat assertion that it's so obvious that Christianity is the one true moral guiding path. It's just wrong on all counts, and we don't even need to spend any time going into slavery,
right?
Infinite punishment for finite crimes, the idea that one person can be held responsible for somebody else's crimes, just start to finish, right down the doctrine, and not to sidetrack everything.
Sure.
If you go to ironchariots.org, the counter-apologetics wiki that I started, that Russell did a lot of work on as well, and there are other people who are working on it now. I'm not, but I did a deconstruction of the Sermon on the Mount, because this is a passage that Christians generally think or view as the greatest thing anybody has ever said. And I'll freely admit that there are some good things within the Sermon on the Mount, far fewer than most Christians would claim. And I did a verse-by-verse look at this to say, is this really the greatest thing anybody ever said? Some of this is common sense, some of it's just wrong, and some of it's bad advice. And if this is the kind of information that you get from your God incarnate, I'm unimpressed. But back to objectivism.
Okay, well, getting back to Ayn Rand, I just want to point out that this is a place where I have some misgivings that Ayn Rand might start to veer off into Chuck Colson territory. Because to say that every man is an end to himself, and he must do this and he must not do that, seems to be wandering into the territory of mixing up values and the objective reality, which she just spent the last two points talking about.
Yeah, and there's a huge flaw in that third one, or a couple of huge flaws, I'd say, in that third one. One is, as you pointed out, this must do, that kind of almost dogmatic assertion. The second one is that he shouldn't sacrifice himself for others or others for himself, and the justification of this is the pursuit of his own rational self-interest. And yet, rational self-interest is not clearly defined within this context. I mean,
right.
What you may consider to be in your best interest and best self-interest and consider it rational, someone else might object to.
Let me throw out an example. What if a guy wants to sacrifice himself for somebody else? Well, who the hell is Ayn Rand to tell him that he can't do that? Well,
I mean, it would be a free expression of her opinion that he is acting. He is not acting consistently with her moral values. Right. But we haven't gotten to a point where we can say, oh yes, I agree that you're correct on this.
Yeah. Well, I'll get back to this, but then we get to something else. And before I get to point number 4, let me make a pledge. I disagree. Ayn Rand is in a lot of ways the intellectual forebear of a lot of today's libertarianism. And I think for people who've listened to this show and the nonprofits before, it's no big secret that I'm not really into libertarianism. But my pledge today is I'm going to try not to too much get into a critical thing about libertarianism, because I really want to focus on Ayn Rand's weird definition of what objectivity is, and then get into some of the strange cult-like practices that seem to spring up around her group. But anyway, excuse me, I'm sick and I sound like a teenage boy. Sorry for the coughing, too. This is point number 4. The ideal political economic system is laissez-faire capitalism. It is a system where men deal with one another not as victims and executioners, not as masters and slaves, but as traders by free voluntary exchange to mutual benefit. It is a system where no man may obtain any values from others by resorting to physical force against others. Okay, whether I'm talking politics or not, this is more of the same stuff that concerned me a minute ago about asserting as absolute fact something which is actually of value. She describes she describes the ideal political economic system as laissez-faire capitalism. The question is, it's the ideal system to who?
Yeah, I mean, one could just as easily assert that the ideal political economic system or socio-economic system is communism.
You could assert that,
where we spread the wealth
and
out to everybody.
we wouldn't agree with that.
Yeah.
But, I mean, to take an extreme example, you might say that a monarchy is not an ideal system. But, like Mel Brooks said, it's good to be the king. And if you're going to say that the ideal political economic system is laissez-faire capitalism and not monarchy, I think the king wouldn't agree with that. It really depends on who, whose point of view you're talking from, because there are
or what the goal is.
Right, what the goal is.
I mean, who
and
are
the goal
you?
is something that ought to be discussed way before we get to the idea of evaluating
Right.
what is the ideal system.
And to be fair, though, there were essays and other books that she wrote where she discussed the basis
Certainly.
for some of these precepts of objectivism. And, it may even turn out to be the case that I would agree that if our goal is freedom, individualism, the encouragement of the rights of the individual, then it may turn out to be the case that laissez-faire capitalism is perhaps the best system for that.
It may be, but I'm not sure that that's by any means proven. I mean, America, which is considered to be the greatest country on earth, doesn't have laissez-faire
Right.
capitalism. And I know a lot of objectivists and libertarians argue that it should have more and more of that. But, I mean, if you're just going to talk about it purely from an experimental point of view, you would need a control group if you were going to approach it scientifically. You would need some kind of demonstration. And one of the things that Ayn Rand provides in her books is a fictional experiment that demonstrates how perfect laissez-faire capitalism would be.
Yeah, and to kind of spread some amusement on that, there's another fictional kind of pseudo-scientific test of Ayn Randian type objectivism, and it's called BioShock. It's a video game.
I really want to play that, actually.
And I have played it, and it's an interesting look, but it doesn't make any. It doesn't mean it's any more real. The thing that I think that I have a problem with, with parts of number 4, is the ideas, while they're not particularly well backed up initially, also seem kind of sophomoric and short-sighted in the sense that there seems to be this big assumption of I've thought about this and I've concluded that this is the best way for everybody to live, and it ignores, in my opinion, both the necessity of a cooperative society, the necessity of structure within that cooperative society, and the benefits that come from that, and how those benefits can benefit the individual as well as the group.
Right.